Hey, and welcome to this episode of the show where again we are answering your listener, viewer questions to get to the heart of those things that you really want clarity on. You want to make a breakthrough in terms of your fitness, whether that's to lose body fat, whether that's to build muscle, a little bit of both. Right now, you're confused as fuck. You don't know where to turn. Maybe you've got one dude in the gym telling you one piece of information, you've got some guru on the internet telling you something else. So you've come to your old pal Simon for the actual truth and the no BS, straight down the line, freaking jab straight to the end of the nose information. Whether it's good, bad, indifferent, whether it's what you wanted to hear or not, it's the truth. So let's get down to it. Now we are talking today about supplements, particularly creatine. Often talked about in terms of building muscle, lots of questions that people have around creatine and whether it's good, bad or indifferent, whether men should have it, women should have it. All of these different sorts of questions often crop up. Now, I would say that I've done an extensive article on creatine and a podcast previously. So if you want to listen to that or you want to go read that article, I'll put a link to it in the show notes below. But we're going to cover a specific aspect of creatine within this episode. And it comes from a question from Carpenter Miles on Instagram. So Carpenter Miles, I'm going to give him a little bit of a shout out because he's a good dude. So Carpenter Miles has been following me for a little bit of a while now. He's basically taken information that I've put out on these podcasts, what I put out on Instagram, social media, and he's just gone and applied it. Now, if you want to see the results of someone who just takes free information and actually says, you know what? This weird English guy who swears a lot, but actually talks some fucking sense. Actually, if I applied some of this information, what could happen? Now go to his profile and see his transformation because it is fucking epic. So shout out to Carpenter Miles for actually, applying himself, doing the right things over time, being patient and absolutely nailing a transformation. Cool dude. So anyway, question comes through. Now there's two sections to these creatine questions. One comes from Carpenter Miles and one came from a client who put a question into my Facebook group, which I'll come on to in a second. So the first question here is, does the water retention from using creatine stay until you stop using the supplement? So this is an interesting question because let's talk about creatine itself and the way it works. What creatine is going to do is actually pull water into the muscle cells. Now that is different to water retention that you might be used to hearing about. So you've got water retention that maybe makes you feel a little bit puffy, look a little bit bloated, and that can be caused by increase in stress levels. It could be, if you're a female, caused by menstrual cycle, it can be to do with lack of sleep, overtraining, lots of various different things, even down to like nutrition, maybe a bit of salt intake slightly higher than normal, maybe your carbohydrate intake is slightly different when you're in a deficit and glycogen has been restored. That brings with it some water. So again, all of these different sorts of things will affect water retention levels in the body. But when we're talking about creatine specifically, we're talking about water being drawn into the cells of the muscles, which is different to other types of water retention. So the first point would be to say that water retention from creatine is not necessarily a thing you should be concerned about. That's creatine doing its job. That's kind of what you want it to do. However, a lot of people get worried about that increase in water retention because it comes with an increase in scale weight. So let's say, for example, particularly, I'm going to call out females here. So when a female takes creatine, and they're just about to start a fat loss phase, there can be a little bit of a shock when you see a spike on the scales. And that can often be like a psychological thing to say, whoa, don't want that. Whereas actually you need to know that the increase in scale weight is no way a reflection of a body fat increase. It is purely just water being pulled into the cells of the muscles. So think of like creatine as, your muscle cells being like a sponge. Now, what you can do is you need to saturate that sponge with creatine. So you want to saturate your muscle cells with creatine in order to get the benefit from it. So if you think about a sponge, a dry sponge, then you start to add water to it. That sponge gets heavier because of the water you're adding to it. That's what's happening within your muscle cells. But you're not actually, in terms of physiology, you're not actually increasing any body fat. That's not actually happening. You're just adding water into this sponge effectively. So you can do that two ways. You can drip feed it over an extended period of time. So let's say you take 5 grams of creatine per day for 30 days. That will then saturate the muscles with creatine. Then you'll start to get the benefits, the full benefits from taking that supplement. Or what you could do is overload up front within a 7-day period, maybe 20 grams per day, and really just saturate those muscle cells earlier on. Both methods are equally viable. Now, I would recommend, if you are starting in a fat loss phase, is that you get that done quick. Mainly because you just see that spike in the first week of scale weight, again, not body fat. And then you can start to then see how your body fat and your scale weight reflective of that starts to progress over a period of time. You then don't run this sort of 30-day period where you're increasing your creatine levels and therefore your scale weight is potentially going up because of the water, masking potentially some of the body fat decreases that you're getting as well. And that can be a little bit of a psychological mind fuck for a lot of people. So often it's better to get it out of the way right up front. Now, the question that Miles had about does that water retention last until you stop taking it? Well, the answer is yes, because the fact that you're taking that creatine is that it's drawing the water into the cells of the muscles, amongst the other things that it's doing as well. So if you was to stop taking creatine, your creatine levels would drop, and therefore you wouldn't have that process happening. So that water being drawn into the muscles just wouldn't happen. And that's kind of where that would stop. So to answer the question, yes, you would have this sort of water retention, if you want to call it that, for the period of time of which you take creatine. Now, you do not have to cycle creatine at all. It's perfectly fine to take it continuously. 5 grams per day is often the recommended maintenance dose, and you can just take that perpetually. It's not going to do you any harm or anything like that. So perfectly acceptable for you to do that. And it has proven benefits, which is also cool. The other question I was asked in my client Facebook group was, is there any difference between taking creatine as a pill form versus taking it as powder form? Now, when it comes to creatine types, I would say that the only version of creatine that actually has any specific benefit proven in the research is creatine monohydrate. And that is just the real super basic powder. You've got supplement companies producing all sorts of different versions of creatine, liquid forms, micronized forms, all of these different sort of things. Basically, again, you can kind of imagine the conversations that they're having behind the scenes at these places. Creatine, proven supplement, works. Brilliant. How do we extract as much fucking money out of people as possible based on that fact? Right, okay, so creatine monohydrate's super cheap. We don't make much money out of that. So why don't we create something else that sounds fucking sexy? Let's not worry about the fact that it's proven or not. But if we just say, make up some marketing bullshit around creatine being good, but then this version may be doing something else, which is freaking amazing, then people will buy it and they'll spend more money on their creatine. Okay, I can imagine that's the conversation that happens. But let's get real for a second. Nothing other than creatine monohydrate really has any proven benefits. So whatever other versions of creatine you see, don't bother. Just go for the basic monohydrate powder. Save your money, get the benefit, get the results, and move on. Now, if you can get monohydrate in a pill form, that's cool. You're just getting the same product, just pill versus powder is no real difference. It just comes down to what's your preference for how you take it. So for example, a great way to take creatine might be in a post-workout shake, 5 grams in your post-workout shake, proven to be a slight benefit to having creatine post-workout, but not a huge amount. The more important thing is actually taking it in the first place. But if you can and you want to go down to that level, 5 grams post-workout is a marginal improvement or marginal benefit. If, however, you don't, let's say you don't have a post-workout shake, maybe you have a normal meal, then, you know, putting some creatine powder on your fucking chicken is probably not a good idea because it'll taste like shit. So in that sense, a pill would then make sense. So you just neck a few pills of creatine with whatever drink you want, and then that makes it easier. So pill versus powder, no real difference. It's just based on preference of how you want to take that. But the main point is don't worry about the water retention. The second point is, if you are going into a fat loss phase, my recommendation would be to load creatine early on in a 7-day period, 20 grams per day, get saturated, then drop down to 5 grams per day. Then when you're watching the scales and you're trying to look for progress in terms of body fat, you will actually see that. Then I would say, really don't worry about different types of creatine. Stick to the basic monohydrate powder. If it's more convenient for you to take monohydrate in a pill form, then absolutely go for that. But creatine is a great supplement. Men, women, if you've got a goal based around resistance training, based around strength training, it is a proven supplement that will work and will support you. So absolutely go for it and don't worry about water retention and all that sort of stuff. So I hope this video, this podcast gave you a bit more information about creatine, answered a bunch of questions for you. If it did, awesome. Head over to Instagram. Let me know what you thought at iron_paradise_fitness. And also, if you have questions that you want answering on a future episode of the podcast or on these YouTube videos, then feel free to drop me a comment, or as I say, come and see me on Instagram and drop me a message as well. I'll be happy to answer your questions as best I can on these different episodes of the show. And finally, if you want to get your hands on a free 4-week training program from me, then if you click the link in the show notes below, you can get your hands on that right now. But all that's left for me to say is thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for watching. Keep living the lean life, and I'll see you on the next episode of the show.